We canceled our son's wedding at the last minute to bail our daughter out of jail, told him family comes first, and expected him to understand. Now he's moved across the country, cut us off completely, and says we're dead to him. My husband and I have 2 children. Our son is the oldest, late 20s, very steady, very responsible, the type who's always had his life mapped out. He's never been the one causing problems. He's been with his now wife for years, and they planned what was honestly a beautiful wedding out of state. They handled most of it themselves, which we appreciated. We still contributed financially, because that's what parents do, but this wasn't some fully parent-funded event. Our daughter is younger, mid-20s, and she's always been different. More emotional, more impulsive, more sensitive to pressure. She's creative, social, and yes, she's made mistakes, but she's also had a harder time in life than her brother. I don't think it's fair to pretend all children need the same kind of support. Some kids need more help than others, and as a parent, you respond to that. 2 days before the wedding, everything blew up. Our daughter was arrested. I won't get into every detail, but it wasn't some violent crime, the way people online like to imagine. It was a situation that got out of hand and escalated quickly. The important part was that she was sitting in jail, scared, and needed us immediately. No parent wants to get a call like that. We had limited options. Bail had to be posted quickly, or she would be stuck there until her hearing. The only available money on short notice was what we had set aside, including the remaining portion of what we were supposed to contribute toward the wedding. We also pulled from emergency savings. It wasn't a decision made lightly, and it wasn't about choosing one child over the other. It was about urgency. A wedding can be postponed. Jail is not something you just ignore. I called our son to explain. I expected frustration, sure, but also understanding. I told him we might need to delay things, or at least downsize because we couldn't cover what we'd promised. Vendors might need to be handled differently. Guests might need to be flexible. These things happen in families. I reminded him that family comes first, and that one day, when he has kids of his own, he'd understand why we couldn't leave his sister sitting in a cell over what was ultimately money. What shocked me wasn't anger, but how detached he sounded. His fiancée was also crying in the background, which immediately set the tone for me. It felt like she was driving the reaction instead of him. I tried to stay calm and explain that this wasn't about disrespecting them or their marriage. It was about dealing with a crisis. Instead of working with us, they canceled the wedding entirely. Not postponed, canceled. They left town early, didn't see us before leaving, and stopped communicating, except for short, cold messages. Suddenly, we were being treated like villains for helping our daughter. Now here's where I'm confused. We didn't ask him to give up his marriage. We didn't say he couldn't get married later. We didn't tell him to abandon his plans forever. We asked for flexibility in an emergency. That's it. But he's acting like we deliberately sabotaged his life. Since then, he's barely spoken to us. He moved across the country without telling us until after it happened. He's cut off calls, won't respond to texts, and has told other family members that we chose his sister over him, which I don't agree with at all. Parenting isn't a scoreboard. You don't keep things equal when situations aren't equal. I feel punished for being a mother. I feel like no matter what we did, we were going to be the bad guys. I truly believed he'd cool off, reschedule, and realize that this wasn't some personal attack. Instead, he's escalated it to the point where he's told us not to contact him at all. I'm posting because I genuinely want to know if I'm missing something, or if this is just what happens when adult children decide their parents are no longer necessary. From my perspective, we were dealing with a crisis, not making a statement. But somehow, we're the ones who lost our son over it. Update 1. I knew people would have opinions, but the level of hostility on my first post honestly surprised me. A lot of comments were less about the situation and more about tearing me apart as a parent, which feels unfair given that none of you were actually there when everything happened. That said, I want to clarify a few things because it seems like people are filling in gaps with the worst possible assumptions. My daughter has been arrested before. Twice to be exact. I didn't think that was relevant at first because those situations were handled and in the past, but apparently people think it proves some kind of pattern. What they don't seem to understand is that not every arrest tells the full story. Circumstances matter. She's never hurt anyone seriously. She's never been some hardened criminal, and she's always struggled more than her brother. That's just the reality of our family. Our son helped her financially once before. A few years ago, he offered to help cover bail when we were stretched thin at the time. We didn't force him. He volunteered. At the time, he was living comfortably, had no real expenses, and he said he wanted to help his sister. We thanked him and moved on. I didn't think that meant he'd hold on to it forever or use it later as proof that he's somehow been wronged. What's happened since I posted is that our son has completely stopped responding. Calls go straight to voicemail. Texts are left on read, if they're even opened at all. At first I assumed he just needed space. People calm down, emotions settle, and then you talk it out. That's how families work. But days turned into weeks, and nothing changed. I'll admit this is where I may have overstepped, but I don't think it was unreasonable. I reached out to a few people close to him, friends he's known since high school, a couple of relatives he's always been close with. I even contacted his fiance's parents. Not to cause drama, but because I genuinely believed they were getting a very one-sided version of events. I explained there had been a family emergency. I said we didn't pull funds for selfish reasons or to sabotage anything. I also made it clear that the wedding didn't have to be canceled, only adjusted. From my perspective, the bride was being inflexible and emotional, and instead of helping him see the bigger picture, she was encouraging him to cut us off. That's when things really started to turn. Her parents were polite at first, but they made it very clear they didn't agree with me. They told me outright that my son had paid for the majority of the wedding himself. I knew that, obviously, but the way they framed it made it sound like our contribution was nothing, which hurt. We gave what we could, and I don't think money is the only way parents show support. They also implied that our son had been carrying resentment for a long time. That honestly felt like an attack. If he had issues, he could have said something years ago instead of letting it explode like this. Within the family, sides are forming. Some relatives privately admit they think we favor our daughter, but they say it in a way that feels more like they're repeating internet talking points than actually understanding us. Others defend us publicly, but I can tell they're just trying to keep the peace rather than genuinely agreeing. Our daughter is staying with us now while she deals with her legal situation. People online are reading into her behavior way too much. She jokes about her legal situation. That's how she copes. She's not heartless. She's just not someone who processes stress quietly. She's grateful we helped her, even if she doesn't express it the way people expect. What hurt the most was finally hearing from our son, briefly. One message, no emotion, no explanation, just a statement that this wasn't about the wedding and never was. That felt like gaslighting, to be honest. Everything that happened started with the wedding. That was the catalyst, whether he wants to admit it or not. Now people here are accusing me of emotional neglect, of parentifying my son, of treating him like he didn't matter. I completely reject that. He was always independent because he wanted to be. He was always capable. He never needed constant monitoring or help the way his sister did. I don't understand how responding differently to different kids automatically makes someone a bad parent. I also don't buy the idea that his fiancée has nothing to do with this. Before her, he never talked about cutting people off. He never talked in this all-or-nothing way. Now suddenly we're toxic and unsafe, which are words he never used before. It feels like someone else is steering the narrative, and we're just supposed to accept being erased. I still believe he's rewriting history to justify a decision he already wanted to make. Update 2. Since weeks of silence, our son finally sent a long message. Not a call, not a conversation, just something sent and clearly meant to say his piece without interruption. I won't repeat it word for word, but the overall message was that this situation was never just about the wedding or the money tied to it. According to him, the wedding was simply the moment where he stopped swallowing everything else. He brought up things I genuinely did not expect him to frame the way he did. Years ago, when our daughter had a rough stretch and agreed to try rehab, he helped pay for part of it. At the time, we were overwhelmed and grateful. I remember him saying it wasn't a big deal, that he had savings and wanted to help. I never saw it as something transactional or something that needed to be revisited later. He does. He also brought up a period when our daughter stayed in one of his apartments after an argument at home turned ugly and things got damaged. He covered her rent for a while so she wouldn't be homeless. Again, this was framed by him as responsibility being quietly shifted onto his shoulders. From my perspective, he stepped in because he could, and because he wanted to. Families do that. What really upset me was the accusation that we promised to pay him back and never did. I don't remember it that way. I remember saying we'd figure things out when things stabilized, which they eventually did. Life moved on. Bills got paid. I didn't realize he was keeping some kind of mental ledger. According to him, every time his sister struggled, he was expected to be understanding, flexible, and helpful. Every time he needed emotional support, he was told he was strong and would be fine. I don't deny that he's always been more independent. That's been true since he was a teenager. but I never thought he saw that as abandonment. He said he felt more like a backup adult than a child in the family. I find that hard to accept. We didn't ask him to raise his sister. We didn't neglect him. We trusted him, and apparently that trust has been twisted into something ugly in his mind. The part that hurt the most was when he said the wedding money was his line in the sand. That moment, when we redirected funds without asking, was proof to him that he would always come second. That feels unfair. Emergencies don't wait for permission. If we had paused to negotiate, our daughter would have been sitting in jail longer, and no parent with a conscience would choose differently. I did respond, and maybe that was a mistake. I tried to remind him of everything we sacrificed over the years. The years of work, the sleepless nights, the things we went without to give him opportunities. I reminded him that loyalty doesn't stop when you get married, and that parents don't become disposable just because children grow up. I probably leaned too hard into that, but I was emotional and felt attacked. His response was short and cold. He said he wanted repayment for every dollar he loaned over the years, and that any further communication should be in writing. That was the moment it stopped feeling like a family conflict and started feeling like a threat. I never imagined my own child would talk to us like that, like we were strangers or business partners. Since then, the fallout has been spreading. Friends we've known for years have gone quiet. People who used to check in regularly now keep conversations short or avoid us entirely. I've heard through others that there's talk at church, that people are whispering about favoritism and dysfunction. None of that context includes how hard it is to parent a child who constantly needs help, or how easy it is for outsiders to judge after the fact. To make things worse, our daughter picked up another charge for violating the terms of her bail. It wasn't something extreme, but it was enough to complicate everything again. She's stressed, scared, and trying to keep it together, and yet she's being used as proof that we somehow failed across the board. I feel betrayed, if I'm being honest. Betrayed that my son held on to resentment for years instead of talking to us. Betrayed that he chose to unload it all now, when tensions were already high, instead of when there might have been room for understanding. From his side, I'm sure he feels relieved, like he finally said what he's been holding in. From my side, it feels like he rewrote our entire family history in one message. What hurts most is that no one seems interested in the gray areas. It's either we're monsters or he's a victim. Reality isn't that simple. I can acknowledge mistakes without accepting the idea that we intentionally harmed him. I don't believe loving one child through chaos automatically means abandoning the other. At this point, everything feels unstable. Our relationship with our son is hanging by a thread, and I don't even know if that thread still exists. What I do know is that this has gone far beyond a canceled wedding, and I'm starting to realize that whatever he's dealing with has been building for a long time, whether we saw it or not. Update 3. It's been a week since my last update, so communication from my son stopped completely. No replies, no read receipts, nothing. I assumed he was cooling off, or that his fiancée was telling him to stay away until things blew over. I still believed, maybe foolishly, that time would fix this. Families fight. They always come back. That's what I kept telling myself. Then I found out he got married. Not from him. Not from a call. Not even from a distant relative. I saw it on Facebook. A mutual acquaintance posted congratulatory photos of them standing in front of a courthouse, holding paperwork, smiling like nothing had ever happened. No big wedding, no guests, no parents, just the two of them and a caption about starting fresh. I felt physically sick when I saw it. Not because I wanted a party or attention, but because this was clearly deliberate. He didn't just exclude us, he erased us. There was no mistake here. He didn't forget to tell us. He chose not to. I messaged him immediately. Nothing aggressive. Just asking why I had to find out that way. He didn't respond. Later that day, I found out they'd moved. Across the country. Jobs transferred. Lease signed. The whole thing. This wasn't impulsive. This was planned. Around the same time, my daughter's court date came up. I was already under a lot of stress, barely sleeping, barely eating, and I'll admit I wasn't thinking clearly. I went with her for support. I thought it mattered that at least one parent was there for her, especially given everything else going on. That turned into another disaster. The judge asked questions about her support system and her past behavior. When I spoke up, trying to explain that she's had a rough few years and needs help, not punishment, the judge shut me down almost immediately. He told me my presence wasn't helping and questioned whether I was enabling her behavior. In front of a full courtroom, I was embarrassed and angry, and yes, I'd had a drink beforehand to steady my nerves, which was clearly a mistake. The judge dismissed me as a character witness entirely. My daughter was furious afterward, not at herself, but at me. She said I made things worse, that I embarrassed her, that if I just stayed quiet things would have gone better. That hurt more than I expected. I thought at least she understood I was always on her side. Then the real blow landed. A few days later, I was served paperwork. My son has filed a civil claim against us. Not just for the wedding money, but for everything. Every time he helped his sister. Every transfer. Every receipt. He had dates, amounts, screenshots, notes. Things going back almost a decade. Money I didn't even remember clearly, because at the time it felt like family helping family. Seeing it all laid out like that was shocking. I didn't realize he'd been keeping records. I didn't realize he saw those moments as debts instead of support. To me, that was just how families function. You help where you can. You don't keep score. Apparently, he was keeping score the entire time. What hurt the most was realizing this wasn't emotional or impulsive on his end. This was calm, calculated. He'd waited until he was married, relocated, and financially stable before doing this. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He just acted. Extended family has started distancing themselves. People who once told me I was doing my best now suddenly don't want to get involved. A few have outright said they understand why my son walked away. My spouse barely talks about it anymore. When I try to bring it up, they just shut down or change the subject. And my daughter? She's spiraling. Another issue came up with her bail conditions, and instead of taking responsibility, she keeps asking why I didn't handle it better, why I couldn't fix things like I always have. I feel like I'm being punished from all sides, for being a parent, for trying to hold my family together, for refusing to abandon my child when she needed me. People keep saying my son is protecting his peace, but what about mine? What about the years I spent putting my kids first? What about the sacrifices that don't come with receipts? I still believe he took this too far, cutting us off entirely, suing us, moving like we're toxic strangers instead of his parents. I don't know how you come back from that. At this point, I don't even recognize the family I thought I had. Final update. So the civil case came and went. I assumed it would drag out, that there would be room to argue intent or context, or at least acknowledge that family situations aren't clean spreadsheets. That didn't happen. My son came prepared. Every payment, every transfer, every temporary help situation was laid out in a way that made it impossible to deny. The judge didn't care about family dynamics, or what I thought was fair. They cared about numbers and documentation. My son had both. I didn't. We lost. The total wasn't something we could just absorb. Between what he'd given over the years and the added costs tied to the canceled wedding, we didn't have the cash. We were given options, but none of them were painless. In the end, we sold the small rental property we'd planned to keep for retirement, the one safety net we actually had. It's gone now, handed over in pieces to close a chapter I never wanted opened in the first place. My son didn't attend the hearing. He didn't need to. He let his lawyer handle everything. That was almost worse than if he'd shown up angry. There was no emotion in it, just distance. After the case wrapped, I received one final letter. Not an email, not a text. A letter. It wasn't long. It wasn't cruel. It was calm in a way that made it clear this decision had been made a long time ago. He said he was married, settled, and expecting a child. He said this wasn't an attempt to hurt us, but a boundary he wouldn't be crossing again. He made it clear we would not be involved, not now, and not later. He also mentioned, briefly, that legal steps had already been taken to make sure there would be no confusion about that in the future. I read it more than once. I don't know what reaction I was expecting, but it wasn't relief. It felt final in a way nothing else had before. Around the same time, my daughter disappeared. She missed a court date. At first I thought it was a mistake or confusion about scheduling. Then the calls stopped going through. Her things were gone from the room she'd been using. Not packed neatly, just gone. A warrant was issued not long after. I still don't know where she is. Some days I'm terrified something terrible has happened. Other days I'm angry that she walked away and left us to deal with the wreckage. My spouse barely speaks anymore. We exist in the same house, but that's about it. There's no yelling or fighting, just silence. The kind that settles in and makes everything heavier. I can tell they blame me, even if they don't say it outright. Maybe they're right. Maybe we both are. Friends have faded out. People who once checked in regularly now keep conversations short or avoid them altogether. I've heard things through others, bits and pieces of how this story gets told when I'm not there. I'm not surprised. This isn't the kind of mess people want to be associated with. I know what most people reading this think. I've been told enough times that I chose one child over the other, that I enabled instead of helped, that I confused love with obligation. Maybe there's truth in that. I can admit, at least to myself, that I didn't handle things well, but I also know why I made the choices I did. I know what it feels like to look at your child and believe that if you don't step in, no one else will. If I'm being honest, even now, I don't know that I'd make a different choice. That's the part people won't understand, and maybe shouldn't. Losing my son has been devastating. Knowing I'll never meet his child is something I don't think I'll ever fully process. But when I imagine turning my back on my daughter when she was in trouble, I can't do it, even knowing how it ended. This is how families end sometimes, not with one big blow-up, but with decisions that stack up until there's nothing left to hold together.